I can still hear the slam of the police car door that night. It was November of 1985, cold enough that my breath hung in the air like smoke. I had just gotten off a long shift at the auto shop, grease still clinging under my nails, when the flashing red and blue lights swallowed me whole. I remember the look on Mrs. Thompson's face, my neighbor, when she peeked out through her curtains. She pulled them shut as if even seeing me in that situation would taint her. The officers didn't explain much, only that I was being taken in for questioning. Their voices were sharp, mechanical, as if I was already guilty. My hands trembled as they forced the cuffs on, the metal biting into my skin. I tried to tell them there had to be some mistake. "Please," I begged, "I didn't do anything." But all I got back was silence. The car ride was endless. The smell of old vinyl and cigarette smoke filled my nose. The city lights blurred past the window, every turn making me sicker, every bump a reminder that I was no longer free. When they finally dragged me into the station, the noise hit me like a hammer. Phones ringing, typewriters clattering, voices overlapping. But what cut deepest was the look on Sarah's face when I saw her in the hallway. She didn't rush to me. She didn't even speak. She just lowered her eyes. That silence, it told me everything. Something was wrong, and I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal would go. Inside the interrogation room, the walls pressed in on me. A single buzzing light overhead, a table scratched with the ghosts of past confessions, and two detectives staring like vultures. One of them, Detective Carlson, leaned forward with a smile too rehearsed to be kind. "James Walker," he said slowly, "we know you did it." I blinked, confused, searching my memory. Did what? Then the words dropped like a guillotine. The murder of Daniel Whitaker. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. Daniel was a local store clerk, a man I barely knew, killed in a robbery gone wrong. I stammered, I wasn't anywhere near." But they cut me off. They said my fingerprints were found on a bottle near the scene, a bottle I had bought soda from 2 days earlier. I tried to explain, but my voice kept breaking. They didn't want my words, they wanted my guilt. Hours passed. No food, no water. Just their voices drilling me down, painting me into a corner where every answer sounded like a lie. By the time they pushed the confession papers in front of me, my body was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. I didn't sign. I couldn't, but my refusal only hardened their stares. I saw it in their eyes. They had already decided who I was. When they finally let me out of that room, dawn was breaking. I was shoved into a holding cell, the air heavy with urine and despair. A man on the bench muttered nonsense to himself, rocking back and forth. Another one snored with a hollow, rattling sound, and I sat there staring at the grey wall, numb. Hours later, Sarah came. I thought she would hug me, whisper that we'd fight this together. But she didn't step close. She stood on the other side of the bars, her arms folded, eyes swollen from crying. "James," she said, her voice shaking, "they're saying they have proof. What if it's true?" Those words shattered something inside me. She doubted me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted above all else, doubted me. I begged her, "Sarah, look at me. You know me. I didn't do this." But her silence was heavier than the cell door slamming shut. That was the day I realized my life wasn't just falling apart, it was being ripped away, piece by piece. And I hadn't even faced the trial yet. Before the bars, before the silence, before the years stolen from me, I was just James Walker, a man with calloused hands and simple dreams. I lived in a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew each other's names and gossip moved faster than the wind. I worked at Henderson's auto shop, a place that smelled of motor oil and burnt rubber, where my days were filled with the sound of wrenches clinking and radios playing country music in the background. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. Every Friday I'd pick up a six-pack on my way home, and Sarah would cook her mother's pot roast recipe, the whole house filling with the aroma of garlic and thyme. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and to me the enough was happiness. On summer evenings, Sarah and I would sit on the porch swing, the cicadas buzzing, fireflies flickering in the yard. She'd lean her head on my shoulder, and we'd talk about the future. Children, maybe a little house outside town away from the gossip and the noise. She'd always laugh when I told her I wanted a dog before a baby. "You and your dogs," she'd tease, her laugh so bright it lit up the night. I held on to that laughter like it was a promise, A promise that life would only get better. I had no idea that promise would vanish like smoke. Sundays were my favorite. My father, Thomas, and I would fish by the river, the smell of damp earth mixing with the faint scent of my mother's pies cooling on the windowsill. Dad was a man of few words, but his silence was steady, comforting like an anchor. I looked up to him, wanted to be like him. Honest, hard-working, never bending even when life pressed him down. My mother, Linda, was softer. She fussed over me like I was still a boy, always slipping an extra sandwich into my lunch bag or pressing my cheek with flour-covered hands when she baked. "You've got a good heart, James," she'd say, her eyes filled with a faith that made me feel untouchable. Back then I thought the world was simple. Work hard, love your family, keep your head down, and life would reward you. That's what I believed. That's what everyone around me believed. But I didn't know how fragile that kind of faith was, how quickly it could be crushed in a single night. The last truly normal memory I have is Sarah humming while folding laundry. The basket was overflowing with shirts and jeans, and she was glowing, more than usual. She wore a soft blue dress, and when she noticed me watching her, she blushed like we were teenagers again. "What?" She laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Nothing," I said, "just you." She walked over, pressed a kiss to my cheek and whispered, "We're going to have a beautiful life, James, I know it." That moment plays in my mind like a broken record. The way she smiled, the warmth of her hand on my face, the smell of fresh laundry and lavender detergent in the air. I didn't know then that she was hiding something, a secret growing inside her, one that would explode my life into pieces. Daniel Whitaker wasn't a close friend of mine, but he was a familiar face. He ran the small corner store on Maple Avenue, the kind of place where you could buy a cold soda after work or a pack of smokes on your way home. He was kind, always throwing in an extra piece of candy for the kids. The night he died, I was at home with Sarah. We'd eaten late, leftover spaghetti and a loaf of bread that my mother had dropped off earlier that week. I remember the smell of garlic still lingering in the kitchen. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Daniel had been murdered during a robbery, shot behind the counter of his own store. The town buzzed with fear and suspicion. I didn't think twice about it at first. I felt sorry for him, for his family, but tragedies like that never touched me directly, or so I thought. By that afternoon, I noticed whispers at the auto shop, co-workers avoiding my eyes, conversations cutting off when I walked into the break room. I brushed it off, until 2 days later, when the police showed up. They said they found my fingerprints on a glass bottle near the register, a bottle of soda I had bought the evening before. That's when my stomach dropped. I knew I was walking straight into something I couldn't explain away. The questions didn't stop. Where had I been that night? Why hadn't anyone seen me leave the house? Could Sarah confirm my alibi? She tried at first. She said I was home with her, but the officers kept circling back, pressing harder, twisting her words. I watched her face change. Doubt crept in where there had once been certainty. Then came the so-called witnesses. A man named Carl Benson swore he saw me near the store the night of the robbery. I knew Carl. He was a drunk, always hanging around bars, always looking for quick cash. I wanted to scream that his words meant nothing. But in that courtroom later, his voice would carry more weight than mine ever could. They found no weapon on me. No stolen money, no blood on my clothes, nothing. Just that fingerprint. Just Carl Benson's words. But sometimes in a small town, that's enough. Once people decide you're guilty, facts stop mattering. It felt like the walls of my life were closing in, brick by brick, accusation by accusation. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The night before my arrest, I couldn't sleep. Sarah lay beside me, tossing and turning, her hand pressed protectively against her stomach. I didn't notice it then, not the way I should have. But she kept touching herself like she was guarding a secret. I asked her what was wrong, and she just said, "It's nothing. I'm just tired." But her eyes were distant. Her silence felt heavier than the darkness around us. That night, the wind howled against the windows, and I swear I felt something shift inside me. A premonition almost, like the life I had worked for, the life I had dreamed of, was already slipping through my fingers. And then came the knock on the door. Loud, merciless. 3 hard bangs that echoed through my bones. By the time I opened it, the officers were already there, ready to drag me into the nightmare that would swallow 35 years of my life. Didn't know then that Sarah was already hiding, Something from me. Something that would change the meaning of betrayal forever. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, a place where the air itself felt heavy, as if the walls had absorbed decades of sorrow. I sat there in my suit, the one Sarah had picked out for me months earlier for a wedding we were supposed to attend, not for this. My wrists itched where the cuffs had rubbed raw, though they had been removed before I entered the courtroom. Still, the weight of them lingered. Frank Doyle, the prosecutor, strutted around like he already owned the room. His voice boomed as he painted me as a monster, a desperate man who had robbed Daniel Whitaker's store and pulled the trigger without hesitation. He pointed at me with every sentence, as if his finger itself could pin the guilt to my chest. My lawyer, Anthony Reed, sat beside me flipping through papers, his hands shaking. He was young, barely out of law school, and I could see in his eyes that he wasn't ready for a fight like this. When it was his turn to speak, his words stumbled. He objected weakly, his voice no match for Doyle's thunder. I wanted to grab him, shake him, scream, fight for me. But all I could do was sit there silent, caged in plain sight. And then there was Judge Harris. Cole detached his gavel a weapon. Every time Reed tried to push back, Harris cut him off. Every ruling went Doyle's way. I realized then that this wasn't justice, it was theater. And I was the sacrifice. The witnesses lined up like dominoes, each one tipping the scales further against me. Carl Benson took the stand first, swearing he saw me outside Daniel's store the night of the murder. His words dripped with false confidence, and though his past as a drunk and gambler was no secret, Doyle framed him as a concerned citizen. Then came the so-called forensic expert, holding up that soda bottle with my fingerprint on it, as though it were a smoking gun. "This places Mr. Walker at the scene," he said, ignoring the fact that hundreds of people touched that counter every week. My defense never pushed back, never asked the questions that burned in my mind. How long had that bottle been there? Why was no one else's fingerprint tested? And Sarah, my Sarah, sat in the gallery, her eyes wet but her mouth shut. She didn't testify. Reed said it was better that way, that her word could be twisted. But her silence cut deeper than any accusation. I needed her voice. I needed her faith. Instead, I felt abandoned in the very moment I needed her most. By the end of the second week, I could feel the verdict before it was spoken. Each word against me was a nail in the coffin, hammered deeper until I could barely breathe. The jury didn't take long. Their footsteps echoed down the hall like a death march when they returned. I tried to meet their eyes as they filed back in, but most of them avoided me. My palms sweated. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst from my chest. Guilty. The word dropped like a stone into a well, sinking, until it filled me with darkness. I turned toward Sarah, desperate for something. One last spark of belief. But she only covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaking down her cheeks. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She just wept. Judge Harris sentenced me to life in prison. His gavel slammed, and the sound still echoes in my ears even now, decades later. That was it. 35 years stolen in a single moment. As the guards led me away, I looked back at Sarah for the last time as a free man. Her hands clutched her stomach protectively. And it hit me. She was hiding something. But I didn't yet know it was our child. Or at least I thought it was. The first thing that hit me when I stepped through the prison gates wasn't the sound, it was the smell. A rancid mixture of sweat, bleach, and something sour, like spoiled food that had been sitting too long. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though freedom itself had been sucked out of it. My stomach turned, and my knees nearly buckled when the guard shoved me forward. The steel doors clanged shut behind me, one after another, each slam echoing down the corridors like a funeral bell. I remember the sound of voices, shouts, curses, laughter that wasn't laughter at all but something darker, twisted. The prisoners behind bars watched me as I passed, their eyes sharp, hungry, as if they were sizing up fresh meat. "New fish," one of them hissed. Another banged on the bars until my ears rang. Officer Daniels, the guard assigned to escort me, leaned close, his breath reeking of tobacco. "Don't think you're special, Walker," he muttered. "You'll break just like the rest." I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to say I wasn't supposed to be here, but the words caught in my throat. What good were words in a place like this? They had already failed me in court. They had already been twisted into lies. That night, When the lights went out and the prison sank into an eerie hum of coughs, snores and whispers, I lay on a thin mattress that smelled of mildew, staring at the cracked ceiling. I pressed my fists against my chest, trying to hold myself together. The world outside had vanished, and I was terrified it would forget me forever. The next morning I met Marcus Lee. He was my cellmate, a tall man with skin scarred from old fights and eyes that carried a strange calmness. He studied me for a long time before speaking. "You look like a man who still thinks he's leaving soon," he said. I didn't know how to answer. My voice cracked when I finally managed, "I didn't do what they say." Marcus chuckled softly, not mocking, just resigned. "Everyone says that in here. You'll learn quick. Truth don't matter. Survival does." His words cut through me. Survival. That wasn't a word I had ever associated with my life before. I had thought in terms of living, working, loving. Now it was stripped down to survival. Eat, breathe, avoid danger, repeat. At breakfast I carried my tray through the mess hall, the noise deafening, spoons clattering, men shouting, guards barking orders. The food was grey, tasteless slop, but my hands shook too much to even eat. I felt eyes on me the entire time. Predators waiting. When one inmate shoved me on my way back, nearly spilling my tray, Daniels just smirked from across the room. No help, no protection. This was the law of the cage. You were on your own. That night, Marcus whispered before sleep, "Keep your head down. Don't talk too much. And pray." His voice lingered in the dark. For the first time, I realized prayer was all I had left. Days blurred into weeks. The routine became chains around my body. Wake at dawn, line up for count. Eat food that tasted like ash. Work in the laundry until my back screamed. Every sound amplified. Keys jangling, gates slamming, men screaming in distant fights. The prison was alive, a beast that fed on our fear. Officer Daniels made it his mission to break me. He would stop at my cell, sneering, kicking the bars just to rattle me. "How's it feel, Walker?" he'd say. "Knowing you'll rot here while the world moves on without you." His laughter was the kind that stayed in your bones. I tried to hold on to memories of Sarah, of my parents, of the porch swing in summer nights. But those memories began to feel like dreams, fragile and fading. And in their place, the prison carved itself into me. One night, as I lay awake listening to the moans and cries that filled the halls, Marcus spoke again. "They'll try to make you forget who you are. Don't let them." I wanted to believe him, but the truth was I was already losing pieces of myself. With every passing day, James Walker, the man who once fixed cars and dreamed of a family, was slipping away. And I feared that soon there would be nothing left but a prisoner. The letter came folded in half, the paper already creased and smudged from too many hands touching it before it reached mine. My heart thudded in my chest the moment the guard shoved it through the bars. Prison mail was never good news. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling, and read the words in my mother's handwriting. "James, your father is gone. A heart attack." It was quick. The words swam before my eyes. I read them over and over, each time hoping they would rearrange themselves into something else, anything else. But they didn't. My father, Thomas Walker, the strongest man I had ever known, the anchor of my world, had dropped dead while I sat rotting in a cage. I pressed the letter against my chest, choking on air, my body trembling so hard I thought my bones might break. I remembered fishing with him by the river, his silence steady, his presence unshakable. And I wept like a child, my sobs muffled into my thin pillow so the other inmates wouldn't hear. They didn't let me go to his funeral. No last goodbye, no hand on his casket. Just a letter, just words, and in prison words cut deeper than knives. 2 years later it happened again. Another letter, another blow. This time the handwriting wasn't my mother's, it was my cousin's. The first line was enough to shatter me. "Aunt Linda passed away in her sleep last night." I stared at the paper for hours, numb. My mother. The woman who had kissed my cheek with flower-covered hands. The woman who had said I had a good heart. She was gone, and I hadn't even known she was sick. I pressed my forehead against the cold bars, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry." I imagined her kitchen, the smell of pies cooling on the windowsill, her soft voice telling me everything would be okay. So I tried to hold on to that memory, but it slipped through my fingers like sand. When I asked Officer Daniels if there was any way at all, that I could see her one last time, he smirked. "What part of life sentence don't you understand, Walker?" Then he walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor, leaving me with a grief so sharp I thought it might split me open. That night, Marcus found me sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. He put a hand on my shoulder, heavy but steady. "We lose everyone in here," he said softly, "one by one. And the world don't stop for us," I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the walls down. But all I did was sit there hollow, while the prison swallowed another piece of me. After my parents died, letters stopped coming as often. Family grew distant. Friends faded away. At first they wrote, promising to visit, promising they believed in me. But time eroded their voices until silence replaced them. On visiting days, I'd sit in the waiting room, watching other men hold their wives' hands, watching children press against the glass to see their fathers. My name was never called. The emptiness of that waiting hurt worse than any guard's fist. I started talking to ghosts, to my father by the river, to my mother in her kitchen. I whispered to them at night, begging them not to forget me. But deep down I knew they were gone and the world was moving on without me. Prison doesn't just cage your body. It erases your existence piece by piece. First your freedom, then your family, then your memories, until there's nothing left but the number stitched on your uniform. I still dream of my parents sometimes. In the dreams they're waiting for me on the porch swing, the fireflies glowing around them. My father nods, my mother smiles, and for a moment I feel whole again. Then I wake up to the clang of the morning bell. And I remember, I never got to say goodbye. Years in prison don't pass like years on the outside. Out there, people measure time in birthdays, holidays, seasons. In here, time is measured by the clang of metal doors, by the endless counts, by the shuffle of chains on the floor. 1 year bleeds into the next until decades feel like a single long grey day. I remember when my hair began to turn grey. I caught sight of myself in the cracked mirror above the sink, and for a moment I didn't recognize the man staring back. Wrinkles carved into my face, my shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. I pressed my hands to the glass, whispering, "Who are you?" The letters had stopped completely by then. Sarah was gone from my life. No visits, no words, just silence. For years I told myself she was busy, she was scared, she would come eventually. But deep down I knew. She had erased me. The guards no longer called me Walker with contempt, they called me Old Man. I became invisible, a piece of the furniture in that rotten place. Younger prisoners came and went, looking at me with pity or disgust, as if I were a reminder of what awaited them if they didn't survive the system. The worst part wasn't the violence, the cold, or the hunger. It was the forgetting. To be forgotten is to die while still breathing. Marcus was the only constant. Over the years we became something like brothers, bound not by blood but by survival. He had killed a man in a bar fight when he was young, and prison had stolen most of his life too. You ever think about what the world looks like now? He asked me once as we scrubbed the floors side by side. "Every day," I said, "and every day it hurts more." We'd talk about the little things we missed, the smell of rain on fresh-cut grass, the sound of a baseball game on the radio, the taste of fried chicken from a roadside diner. Simple things, but they became treasures in our minds, polished by memory until they glowed brighter than reality ever had. Marcus always told me, "We gotta keep something alive inside us. James, otherwise this place wins." But some nights, I wondered if I had already lost. I dreamed of Sarah's face, only to wake up and realize I could barely remember her voice. I dreamed of my parents, but their features blurred more each year. Prison didn't just steal my present, it was erasing my past too, 30 years. That's how long I spent watching men come and go. Some walked out free, some left in coffins, some just broke, their minds unraveling until they were shells of themselves. I thought often about death, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, tired way. Death seemed like an end to the waiting, an end to the endless grey. I wondered if anyone would notice when I was gone. Would Sarah? Would anyone outside remember my name? Or would I just be another number crossed off a list? Then one night, Marcus whispered something I'll never forget. "James, what if you're not meant to die here? What if the truth comes out someday?" I laughed bitterly at first. Hope was dangerous. It was a flame that burned you if you held it too close. But his words stuck to me. What if? What if the world hadn't forgotten me completely? That fragile thought, that tiny spark, kept me breathing when everything else in me had gone numb. And years later, when a stranger's name would appear, a journalist named Karen Mitchell, it would be that spark that flickered back to life. It was an ordinary day in prison. Grey walls, grey food, grey hours when the guard called my name. "Walker, you've got a visitor." For a moment my heart stuttered. A visitor? After so many years of silence? I shuffled to the visiting room, my mind spinning through every possibility. Could it be Sarah? No. My parents, gone. Maybe Marcus had arranged something, though he never had anyone out there either, and then I saw her. A young woman, maybe in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and sharp, determined eyes. She had a notebook open in front of her, a pen already in hand. She didn't smile when she saw me. She studied me as though I were a puzzle she had been trying to solve for months. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sympathy. "My name is Karen Mitchell. I'm a journalist. And I believe you're innocent." The words hit me like a blow. Innocent? No one had said that word to me in decades. Not the guards. Not the lawyers. Not even Sarah. My throat tightened and I could only whisper, "Why now?" She leaned closer, her pen tapping the page. "Because I found something. Something that was buried." And just like that, after 30 years of silence, hope crawled back into my chest. Karen spread out photocopies of old files on the table between us. They looked worn, faded, the ink smudged with time. She pointed at one page with a red mark. "This," she said, "was a statement given by a witness that night. A woman named Helen Murphy. She swore she saw another man running from the store after the gunshot. She described him, tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket. That doesn't match you at all, but this statement was never used in court. It wasn't even shown to the defense." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling as if the ink itself carried electricity. They hid this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Yes," Karen said. Her eyes burned with anger. "They buried it. And there's more. The forensic report on that soda bottle. It was incomplete. It noted other prints, smudges, even palm marks, but only yours was tested. And the detective in charge, Carlson, he had already been under investigation for tampering with evidence in another case." Her words crashed over me, one after another, like waves breaking a dam. For years I had lived with the weight of guilt I didn't deserve, with silence pressing down on me like a coffin lid. And now, sitting in front of me was proof that I had been framed, discarded, buried alive by lies. Karen lowered her voice. "Mr. Walker, I think you were set up to take the fall. And I want to help you." For the first time in decades, I felt something I barely recognized. My chest ached, my hands shook, and tears stung my eyes. It was hope. Raw, fragile, dangerous hope. That night, back in my cell, I couldn't sleep. The prison felt different somehow. The clang of doors, the shouting of inmates, even the heavy footsteps of guards, it all seemed distant, muted, as if I had stepped into another world. A world where maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't die in this cage, Marcus noticed immediately. "What's got you staring at the ceiling like a fool?" he asked, smirking. "A woman came today," I whispered. "A journalist. She found something." Evidence they hid. Marcus's smirk faded. He sat up, his eyes sharp. "Are you serious?" I nodded, tears threatening again. "She thinks I can get another trial. She thinks I can prove I didn't do it." For a long time, Marcus said nothing. Then he reached out and gripped my shoulder. "Don't let them take this from you, James. If you've got a shot at freedom, even after all these years, you fight. You fight like hell." His words echoed in my chest long after the lights went out. For decades I had been fading, disappearing into the shadows of these walls, but now there was a chance to step back into the light, and I swore to myself I would not let it slip away. 2 weeks after Karen's first visit, she returned. This time she wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was a man in his 50s, with graying hair at his temples and a briefcase that looked older than me. His suit wasn't flashy, his tie slightly wrinkled, but his eyes burned with something I hadn't seen in a long time, conviction. "Mr. Walker," he said, extending his hand through the barrier of the table. "My name is Stephen Grant. I've taken on wrongful conviction cases for the past 20 years. Karen showed me your file, and I'll be honest with you, I think you've been buried alive by this system." The words shook me. Wrongful conviction. I had whispered that truth to myself for decades, but to hear it from someone outside, from a man who could fight, was like breathing real air again. I gripped his hand, the strength in his shake grounding me. Do you really think you can help?" Stephen leaned forward. "I don't think, I know. But it won't be easy. The system doesn't like admitting its mistakes, especially after 30 years. The prosecutor, Frank Doyle, he's retired now, but he's still respected. People don't want to believe men like him could ruin lives," Karen added, her pen scratching furiously on her notepad. "But we have the proof, James. That hidden witness statement. The incomplete forensic work. The detective with a history of corruption. It's enough to reopen your case." My heart pounded, hope and fear battling inside me. For decades I had prayed for this moment, and now it was here. But could I survive the fight it would take? The legal process moved slowly, painfully slow. Weeks turned into months as Stephen filed motion after motion, demanding the court review my case. Each time a letter arrived from him, my hands shook before I opened it. Some days the news was good. "We've been granted a hearing." Other days it was crushing. "The state is pushing back hard." When I finally appeared in front of the review board, I felt as though I was walking into the same nightmare I had lived 35 years earlier. The courthouse smelled the same: old wood, dust, faint traces of coffee. The same silence pressed down on me, suffocating. But this time I wasn't alone. Stephen stood beside me, steady as a rock. Karen sat behind us, scribbling notes, her eyes sharp as blades. And when Frank Doyle himself appeared, older now, his hair thinned, his once booming voice now gravelly, I felt the past collide with the present. Doyle glared at me as though I was still the young man he had destroyed decades ago. "This is a waste of the court's time," he barked. The evidence was clear then, and it's clear now. But Stephen didn't flinch. He stood tall, his voice calm but thunderous in its own way. The evidence wasn't clear. It was manipulated. And today we bring the truth into this courtroom. For the first time in 35 years, someone was fighting for me. Really fighting. The days of the hearing felt endless. One by one, the old wounds were reopened. The witness, Helen Murphy, testified via video call, her voice trembling, as she admitted she had been ignored all those years ago. The forensic expert was cross-examined, forced to admit that the evidence had been incomplete, sloppy, biased. Even Detective Carlson's record was dragged into the light, his corruption now undeniable. And me, I stood and told my story again. My voice cracked. My hands shook, but I spoke. I told them about the night of Daniel's murder, about Sarah's silence, about the decades of rotting behind bars while the real killer walked free. My words poured out like blood from an old wound, raw and unstoppable. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Doyle's scowl faltered. For a brief, terrifying moment, I believed the truth might actually be enough. That night back in my cell, Marcus asked me what had happened. I told him everything, my voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and hope. He leaned back, smiling faintly. "Sounds like the tide's turning, James, but tides are slow. And tides can change direction." I knew the fight wasn't over. The court had to decide. And while hope burned brighter than it had in decades, fear whispered in the back of my mind, what if they still say no? What if 35 years isn't enough to prove my innocence? I lay awake staring at the ceiling, caught between hope and dread. Freedom was close enough to taste, but I had lived too long in chains to believe it would come easily. I'll never forget the sound. Not the voices, not the arguments, not even the gavel. It was the sound of the judge saying the words I had stopped believing I'd ever hear. Case dismissed. James Walker is hereby released. The courtroom blurred before my eyes. My knees weakened, my throat closed up, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there. 35 years of chains and shadows, and suddenly, her real air. Stephen gripped my arm to steady me. "You're free, James," he whispered. His voice cracked with the weight of it. Karen was crying, her hands pressed against her notebook, her eyes shimmering with victory and sorrow all at once. But me, I couldn't cry. My body was too hollow. Tears had long ago dried up inside me. All I could do was stare, stunned, as the bailiff unlocked the cuffs one last time. The metal slipped from my wrists and clattered against the table. That sound, sharp and final, was the sound of rebirth. Yet as I walked out of that courtroom, blinking against the sunlight for the first time in decades, fear wrapped around my chest. The world was different. The cars were sleeker, the clothes unfamiliar, the faces younger. I felt like a ghost who had stepped into the future. I was free, but I was also lost. The gates of the prison clanged shut behind me for the last time. I stood there clutching a small box of belongings that felt like relics from another lifetime. A torn photograph of Sarah and me, my father's old pocket knife, a watch that no longer ticked. That was all that remained of James Walker, the man I had been before. The air outside was different, fresher, sharper, filled with sounds I hadn't heard in decades. Birdsong, the rush of traffic, even the distant bark of a dog. I closed my eyes and let the sun touch my skin, warm and almost painful after years of artificial light. A car waited by the curb. Stephen leaned against it, smiling softly while Karen waved me over. "Come on, James," she said. "Let's get you out of here," I hesitated. My legs felt heavy, as if chains still clung to them. For 35 years I had walked only where I was told to walk, stopped when told to stop. Now no one was pushing me forward. No orders, no guards, just choice. The weight of freedom pressed down harder than the weight of the bars ever had. Finally, I forced myself to move. Each step was shaky, uncertain, but it was mine. Mine. The drive away from the prison was surreal. The glass of the car window felt cold against my temple as I leaned my head there, watching the landscape roll past. The trees looked taller, greener. The billboards shouted strange names and slogans I didn't recognize. The world had kept spinning without me, and I was a stranger in my own country. Stephen spoke softly from the driver's seat. "We'll get you settled, James. There are programs for men in your position. We'll figure it out." I nodded, though his words barely reached me. My mind was still stuck on the clang of those doors, the sound of the cuffs dropping, the first breath of air outside. I replayed it over and over, afraid that if I stopped I would wake up back in that cell. Karen leaned toward me from the back seat. "James, the world is going to want to hear your story. People need to know what happened to you." Her words struck me, but not with the excitement she expected. Instead, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. Did I want the world to hear? Or did I just want silence? After 35 years of shouting my innocence into deaf ears, I wasn't sure I had any voice left. As the city skyline rose in the distance, I realized something chilling. Freedom wasn't just a gift, it was a burden, because now I had to face what was left of my life, and the people who had moved on without me. When Stephen first told me that Sarah had given birth months after my sentencing, I couldn't breathe. For decades I had imagined her leaving me, imagined her starting a new life without me. But a child, my child? A daughter I never knew? The thought knocked the air out of my lungs. Her name was Emily. She was 34 now, living just 2 towns away. She had a family of her own, a husband, Peter, and 2 kids. My grandchildren. Blood I had never held, faces I had never kissed. Stephen arranged the meeting. I almost refused. What if she hated me? What if she believed I was guilty, like the rest of the world had for so long? But Marcus's words echoed in my mind. "Don't let them take everything from you, James." The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and pastries when I walked in, a scent I hadn't known in decades. My hands trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the cup Stephen had placed in front of me. And then she entered, Emily. She had Sarah's eyes, that same hazel fire, but her smile, when she gave me a cautious, uncertain smile, was all her own. She stopped a few feet from the table, clutching her purse like a shield. "You're James Walker?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. Tears pricked at my eyes as I whispered, "Emily." She didn't hug me. She didn't even sit down right away. She just studied me, like she was trying to decide if I was a ghost or a man. When she finally sat, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to pour out everything, every memory of Sarah, every dream of holding her as a baby. But all that came out was a broken whisper. "I never knew you existed." Her jaw clenched, her eyes sharp. "Mom said you killed someone, that you didn't want us, that you—" She stopped, her voice cracking. I shook my head violently. "No, Emily, I swear I didn't kill anyone. I begged your mother to believe me, but she—" My words broke. The lump in my throat was too heavy. "She hid you from me. She never told me." Emily's hands trembled as she set her coffee down. "Why would she do that?" And then Stephen, who had stayed silent until then, slid a folder across the table. Inside was the evidence Karen had found, the proof of my innocence, the lies that had buried me. Emily's eyes scanned the pages, her lips parting in disbelief. When she looked up, tears streaked her cheeks. All these years, you weren't lying. I reached across the table, but she pulled back slightly, hesitation flashing in her eyes. The distance between us was more than physical. It was a lifetime of absence. And then she whispered the words that broke me in two. James, you're not my father. The name dropped like a hammer, Robert Johnson. Sarah had turned to him during my trial. While I was being torn apart in court, she was carrying his child. Emily was his, not mine. I sat there frozen, staring at the daughter I had only just found, the daughter I had mourned for 35 years without even knowing she existed. And now I was told she wasn't mine at all. Emily's voice trembled as she explained. Mom told me when I was old enough to understand. She said Robert stepped in when you were gone. He raised me for a while until he left too. She never wanted me to meet you. She said it would only cause pain. Pain. As if the decades I had already lost weren't enough, I swallowed hard, my voice raw. Emily, I may not be your blood, but I am not nothing. I lost everything because of that trial. I thought of your mother every night. And if I had known about you, I would have thought of you too. Every single day. She looked at me then, really looked. Her tears fell freely, but her body stayed stiff, uncertain. She was torn, between the man who had raised her in silence and the stranger in front of her, who claimed to have been robbed of her entire life. Her husband. Peter entered the cafe then, his arm protective around her shoulders. His eyes narrowed at me. This was a mistake, he said sharply. Emily doesn't need this. She looked between us, her eyes swimming in conflict. She whispered, I don't know what to feel. And then she left. Peter guiding her out, leaving me at that table alone. Alone, but with a truth too heavy to carry. Freedom had given me back my life, only to show me it was no longer mine. I wake up now in a small apartment paid for by a re-entry program. The bed is softer than the one I had in prison, but I still sleep on the edge, curled tight, waiting for the clang of doors that never comes. Some habits never leave. When I walk the streets, I see a world I don't recognize. Everyone's faces glow with phones in their hands. Voices rush faster. Cars hum instead of roar. I feel like a man who stepped out of a time machine, except the years weren't skipped. They were stolen. People ask me how it feels to be free. I smile politely. It feels good, I say. But inside, I wonder if I ever really left that cell. My body walks through open streets, but my mind is still behind bars, counting the days. At night, I sit by the window and stare at the stars. The same stars I stared at through a tiny prison slit, night after night. Out there, they look bigger, brighter, but they also remind me of everything I'll never get back. My father's hand on my shoulder, my mother's laughter, the family I never had. Freedom is a strange gift. It's precious, yes, but it came too late for me. Emily came to see me once more, weeks after that first meeting. She didn't come alone. Peter stood outside, waiting by the car, unwilling to let me too close. She handed me a photograph. It was of her two children smiling, their faces full of the life I missed. They don't know who you are, she said softly. But maybe one day. I'll tell them. Her voice broke. Mine did too. Emily, I whispered, I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to know you're happy. That's enough. She hugged me, quick and stiff, but it was the first human embrace I'd felt in decades. I clung to it even when she pulled away. For a moment, I felt like I had touched the life that had been denied to me. But I also knew the truth. I was not her father. Not by blood, not by memory, not by history. I was just a ghost of what could have been. As she left, I whispered to myself, I was innocent. But innocence doesn't give back the years. Now as I sit here, an old man with nothing but stories and scars, I wonder what legacy I'll leave. My name has been cleared on paper, but paper can't erase the decades of silence, the graves I never stood beside, the daughter who never called me father. People look at me and see a survivor. But I don't feel like one. I feel like a man half alive, carrying the weight of 35 stolen years, and yet I tell this story because it matters, because the world should know what injustice does to a man. It doesn't just steal time, it steals family, it steals love, It steals the chance to be whole. I'll never get those years back. But maybe if you hear my voice, if you see my pain, then those years won't have been erased completely. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.